Thank you everyone for joining this pod. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar on the COVID-19 update. This is Caitlin Sickles with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. And on this call today, you'll have Paul Nathanson, also with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell, Omar Nashashibi, and John Guzik from the Franklin Partnership. We know that there is a lot of information coming out, and we're hopeful that today's webinar will be able to break down what's been going on and also answer some of your questions. To that end, this webinar is being recorded, and you will also get a copy of this deck after the fact. So don't worry about trying to capture everything that we say. You'll be able to review it later on. It will also be made available for people who couldn't participate today. In order to ask questions, you can type them into the question box, and you can find that on the right-hand side of your screen. We will be monitoring the questions in real time, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. A couple of caveats there. The first is, obviously, we have constrained time, so we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. If we can't get to you, we will try to connect with you after to provide you with answers. The second thing, and this is important, those of us who are presenting on the presentation today are not lawyers. So some of you will have labor-specific questions that are really best answered by labor lawyers. We have gotten a lot of information from labor lawyers, both the law firms that represent PMA and NTMA, as well as Bracewell's lobbying and legal team. So we will do our best to answer your questions with that information, but there will be some that we can't answer, and we'll be happy to point you in the direction of folks who can provide that for you. So just a quick reminder of who we are before we get started. You have on the call today both your lobbying team and your PR team. I'll give a little bit of background just on your PR team, and then I'll hand it over to Omar and John, who will take you the rest of the way on the lobbying side. So your strategic communications team here at Bracewell, we are the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell. We're in DC, and we promote PMA and NTMA in the media. In the case of a situation like this, what we're really trying to do is give you the best information you can to communicate the messages that you need to keep your shops open, to communicate with your employees, and to communicate with your policymakers who are impacting how you can do business, particularly in this very challenging time. Now I will turn it over to John and to Omar, who will tell you a little bit about Franklin Partnership, and then also the latest from Washington, which is how we'll start today's presentation. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. This is John Guzik with the Franklin Partnership. For those of you who do not know Omar and myself, we are your bipartisan government affairs team here in Washington, D.C. We've been representing manufacturers since 2002, and we represent not only manufacturing trade associations, we represent defense contractors, hospitals, cities, etc. Today we're going to touch base on a number of issues. We've heard from many members, and the turnout for this webinar is probably at an all-time high, and that's why Caitlin gave the caveat on how many questions we can answer, because I think at last look there were 275 people RSVP'd for this webinar. But we're going to talk about the current state of play in Washington and what's going on. Who's making the determination of what is an essential business that could stay open? A lot is happening at the state and local level. They are addressing many of these pandemic issues. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is happening in Washington. We will have extensive discussion about the phase 2 and phase 3 stimulus bills, including the paid sick leave, family medical leave, and then the recent stimulus bill that is up on the House floor for consideration today. So, and then we'll leave it up to questions. So, Omar, who are some of the key players out there right now in this debate in Washington?
Thank you. And I know a lot of people are looking to Washington for answers, and rightfully so. And we'll get into the role that the federal government versus the states play. But right now we had the phase 1 COVID deal that was a bit more bipartisan, that dealt with the ventilators and the drug testing equipment. And then now we moved over into the phase 2 that we'll talk about with the Paid Family Medical Leave Act and the paid sick time expansions that we're taking care of. So as you can imagine, the FMLA and the paid sick time things were all taken care of mostly by Nancy Pelosi and the administration's point person negotiating with Congress, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. So those are the two players there. When we got to this big phase 3 deal, it was instead McConnell with Mnuchin moving it through with a little bit of Schumer involved. The reason we mention this is because the phase 4, it sounds like Pelosi wants to take that one back over again. And so it could be real interesting what we end up coming out with. The Senate is gone. They have left. There are 4 senators that are under either some kind of quarantine. One U.S. senator from Kentucky, Republican Rand Paul, has tested positive for COVID-19. He also swam in the Senate pool, so that also added other complications. 2 others are under self-quarantine, and a 4th, the senator from South Dakota, flew home on a chartered private jet even prior to this vote, again, because he was feeling ill. So this is definitely spreading. The House of Representatives is going to come back in here to take care of this vote unless there's some other hiccups, and then we'll move forward. From the Washington level, I think even despite those that went through Hurricane Katrina, we are glad that FEMA has taken over. The 4 of us here were on a call with FEMA a couple of days ago on Tuesday, and we've been in touch with them last week and again just yesterday afternoon, just trying to get some more answers out of them. But again, now that FEMA's involved and taking the lead, we can get a little bit more definitive answers coming out of the White House and out of the administration. But one thing we have seen clearly is that the focus here is on payroll. When we go through the presentation, you're going to see a number of points where it's reinforced how they want just to keep people employed, keep people from going on unemployment insurance. And that's why they're trying to pull out all the stops here to prevent a reoccurrence or even worse of what we did last time. But it's important to take a look at who's in charge of what. This is not against Donald Trump. This is the way things have been set up. Thomas Jefferson did it for a reason. The states are the ones that take the lead. The localities do it, and then it goes from the cities, the counties, and then the state. In all emergency preparedness, first responders, and health issues. That's just the way the system has been set up for 200 plus years. And that's why you're seeing more of the governors. You've got the Andrew Cuomo show that comes on every day at around 11:30. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of the activity. This is your chart of the current state of the states of where you have stay at home or shelter in place guidelines. The darker blue are those that have stay at home and business closures, and the other one is more just focus on targeted business, largely retail. But as you can see, that's starting to spread quickly in terms of the closures. There is not a national closure coming, is our understanding. We think that the president wants to keep everything open as much as possible and encourage even more openings despite some of the governor's pleas. So we do not expect at this time a nationwide directive that would effectively shutter all businesses. It would be done now at the state and the local level, as you can see here, and then again here. This is a good resource. We strongly suggest those of you that are not dealing with this issue yet, or you're unsure what your county is, you can go to this website. It's effectively go to naco.org, and in the main middle of the screen, you'll click on that link, then click the map. From here, you can go to every county in the country, and it will provide you a link to what the local restrictions are. We're not trying to turn you all into legal researchers. The reason we're telling you this is you're not only dealing with 50 states, you're dealing with 3,000 counties, each of which has the legal authority to set their own standards, which is why the president just yesterday told the governors he's going to categorize them at low priority, medium threat, or high risk. And that will hopefully give a little bit more guidance. But it is important to look to your state and your local levels. We are your federal Washington team, but we wanted to bring you as much information, and that's why we're getting into some of the things that are happening at the local level. But John, there's been a lot of confusion over closures. We've heard from many members since basically last Tuesday when the 6 California counties began shutting things down.
Yeah, I will jump in that. Omar, flip back to that last slide for 1 second. And now, I mean, the president wants to get this country moving again and wants the pews in the churches filled by April 12th for Easter. But if you look at this map by the counties and then look at the state map, Texas is one of those states that have not declared an emergency yet. Yet cities like Houston, as you see on this form, have declared emergencies. And so I think we're a little bit a ways from stopping the progression of this disease. And this map of just the counties, is just one micro example of that. Yeah, there's a lot more to be done. So moving forward, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. Businesses have been told to shut their doors. People have been told to shelter in place, stay at home, and employees, are starting to question their future. And so the crux of this webinar is this page. Like, who is making these decisions? What can I do as an employer? And then what do I need to do to prepare my business operations to move forward once this crisis evolves?
And so that brings us to who determines what is an essential business. The nationwide patchwork is exactly that. The counties have their own designations, and then we move up to the state level. So what we've done, and we'll show you the website in a little bit, it's called onevoiceinfo.org, and that's where you can find all of the information, the materials that the folks at Bracewell have put together. And again, you can also see by the different states. We have put together different guidelines for our members to identify which states are operating under which authority. So this is the real issue, is going back to, let's say, last Tuesday, a week and a half ago, when those 6 counties moved forward in California. They didn't have any guidelines, so they established their own determination of what is an essential business, effectively shuttering anything not directly related or supplying medical or hospitals. So from that came some concern as that definition began to spread around the country to different places that also use a more narrow definition. Ultimately, we went to the White House last Wednesday, pleading with them. On Thursday night, FEMA came out with their own definition. However, it is voluntary. So we do now have an essential critical infrastructure definition that we are still seeking some additional clarity on. But the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency over at Homeland, they did come up with their list. This is their definition of critical manufacturing as of Monday morning. They are supposed to issue an update, we understand today. We reached out to this agency that put out the definition. There is some concerns in particular about automotive suppliers and whether or not they are considered part of this and being a critical infrastructure for the purposes of COVID-19. The initial language simply just stated transportation. After concerns raised by us and others, then it added, and for supply chains associated with transportation. There are still some, particularly in Michigan, that believe that the language is still vague. Therefore, we have gone with a number of other groups, including MEMA and others, yesterday to the Homeland Security folks, asking for either more clarification when it comes to automotive suppliers. Again, this is not a binding definition. What we are seeing, however, is a number of states, such as these here, going in and adopting the CISA definition and putting that in their executive orders. So the way these work is the governor issues an executive order. Within the executive order, they literally list which types of businesses. They don't do it by NAICS codes, unless you're Pennsylvania. They try to keep it based on the end product or the suppliers and the system that supplies them. That's how they determine it. We've been lobbying the states to adopt the CISA language. As you can see, for example, New Jersey's a little bit more open. We'll talk about that here, but this is the breakdown of what state is doing. So if it says CISA, that means that they're adopting that previous definition that we provided you. If it's own, they've come up with their own issues. New York has their own listing as well, and that focuses mostly more narrowly on medical than some of the other states do. To John's point about the counties and how it potentially could spread, we are seeing the counties being a bit more restrictive on some of their definitions. As we get into more Trump country, so to speak, as we get into areas with Republican governors and farmland, we do expect those individual states to most likely adopt what the president's put out as this definition on CISA here. As you can see, it's a patchwork, and that's created a lot of frustration for people, even in states that have not been affected by any closures. We strongly advise you look to a neighboring state that has been closed so you can start getting an idea of what's going on. Because again, John, in Michigan, we've got some issues that are going on there. And then along the list, you can see how even on this slide, different states have their own standards. So that's why it's difficult for us to give you, this is the lay of the land. It's not. Each individual state has the right to do their own thing here.
And that's why it's so critical for each of you to log into onevoiceinfo.org, because as each state has set their guidelines, we have put out a paper analyzing what those state regulations are and requirements are. So you'll be able to pull it off the One Voice website of what those particular states are. For example, Michigan, you just need an email from your customer saying that you're an essential employee. But yet in Pennsylvania, they're much more strict. As Omar said, they require NAICS codes and more. Yet, as Omar says, states like New Jersey, it's a little easier. And then you've got in Kansas City and counties surrounding Kansas City, local municipalities setting up their own specific guidelines. And so, as much as we would love to be able to say this is what everybody needs to do, you need to go back to what your state and local community is doing.
And to help you keep all that straight, what we've done is we have a document, single document with all the regulations that have been issued by each state. We update that daily along with the master tracking document to keep us going. But a lot of this is, where do you go for all this and where do you find it, Caitlin?
Yeah, so we built out a website resource for everyone. You can find it onevoiceinfo.org. There is a ton of content on there, but what we've really tried to do is make it as usable as possible. So we have tried not to just give you links, but we've tried to give you meaningful analysis and actually information you can use. So the two sections of the website I'd recommend really checking most regularly. Right there on the homepage, you can find two categories of content. One is what Omar and John have already referred to, which is the federal, state, and local guidance. So you can see both what's happening at the federal level, which is where they're about to go. You can find, for instance, a breakdown of the most recent legislation that's moving in Congress right now, what that would mean. You're also going to find this list that they're referring to of actions by state and locality, which is helpful for you. You'll find both materials that we've produced and then also some of the links that the guys have already described. You'll also find in another category that we have, which is labor issues and HR compliance tools. So a lot of the questions that we're getting are about labor issues. And so we have an FAQs document, which I think is extremely helpful, put together by your labor lawyers, that answers questions. So that I think is very valuable. And then also you'll find information like what posters do you have to have in your facility if you are an essential business that's remaining open. Just links right there to what you need, and explainers, not just the link, but also explainers from our team about what you need to do. Again, that's onevoiceinfo.org. Check it out. The number at the top, the phone number at the top, for those of you who have already called it, you know it's mine. It rings through to my cell phone. So some people have asked questions or look for additional resources, and you should feel free to do that. I'll be back with a little more info later on.
Sorry, I was unmuting myself. One of the things we've received some requests regarding, some people have received some comments about why are you staying open and why are you risking the health of your employees. So we've put together some talking points. Now it's important to note that, between our two associations, we have thousands of members, so it's hard for us to do individual responses, but we are going to make available some general talking points for both NTMA and PMA members that defend why manufacturing is an essential business and why you're staying open and the steps that you're taking. We are certainly working through both the PMA and NTMA staff to provide answers to questions that they are receiving, that hopefully, and that they distribute. Keep those questions coming to your trade associations. We're working very closely with their staff who are doing a great job and trying to respond, but we do have these general questions, we do try to respond to general questions and try to create answers that can be helpful to everybody.
Right, and it's whether you're talking to yourself, to your employees, or to your customers. In some cases, and we'll get into this in our FAQs in a few minutes, of what you should give your employees, what you should tell them. But especially communicating with your customers is real critical. And when it comes to states like Michigan and others, and Hale brings this point up, it's a good one, just to be safe. If you are in a state that's been designated as stay at home and you are a critical, essential business, critical manufacturer, we suggest, if you can, try to get a letter or some kind of a statement from your customer to that effect. And that way you can also have it for your employees and have them be covered when they're commuting to work, and then also for yourself. Now, that's only required in a couple of states as of now, but it's something that just might be a solid practice in order to do so. But again, going back to Caitlin's point, right now there's a lot of information out there. I know it's tough to digest. We suggest just go to that website and you'll be able to get at least some of the resources to help get you through hopefully some of this now. But John, right now, the big question comes back up here to us in DC. What is Washington doing to help? And there's, so far, we've just now going to wrap up phase 3 out of phase 4 of the different bills that they're working on.
Yeah, so we spent the first 15 or 20 minutes of this webinar talking about what is being done at the state and local level. Much of the remainder of this webinar is what is going on in Washington. And as you probably can't help but notice, the Congress, some bipartisanship broke out, and they passed 3 phases of the COVID-19 solutions. Phase 1 was to deal with funding for additional test kits and funding for studies for a potential vaccination. Phase 2 passed in a strong bipartisan way a week or two ago, which provided sick leave, family medical leave, refundable tax credit for businesses that utilize the sick leave and the family medical leave. We'll go into more details there. Phase 3 is what the House of Representatives is voting on today, and that's a $2 trillion program that provides direct funding to individuals. They're expecting $1,200 checks to individuals making under $75,000, direct loans to businesses over $500,000, loans to small businesses, support for state and local governments, support for hospitals. And so the Congress has never passed anything this large, but they're not done. And we are anticipating when the Senate comes back in mid-April that they're going to consider a phase 4 bill. Additional funding for FEMA. I think you're going to see additional funding for hospitals, how they're going to fund the dollars for the additional ventilators. I think you're going to see some of those provisions in phase 4, and we may see some additional tax provisions. That some tax provisions were addressed in phase 2 and phase 3, but there may be some additional tax inducements in phase 4.
So let's just spend, if we could, for the next several slides, we're going to break this into 2 parts. Now we're going to focus on phase 2. That is what the president signed into law on March 18th, last Wednesday, and that dealt with the expansion of paid sick leave and FMLA. In a moment, we'll jump into what, as John mentioned, is being passed hopefully today, this afternoon, by the U.S. House. But for purposes of right now, the next 4 or 5 slides, this is only on phase 2. The expansion of paid sick leave are the next couple slides. So you have to look at this in 2 different components. You have FMLA expansion and you have paid sick leave expansion. It applies to 499 and below employee shops. Many members came and asked us, why are they letting all the big companies off the hook? What is happening? And the only response that we've gotten from Capitol Hill is the statistics, Bureau of Labor Statistics tells us, or Wage and Hour Division tells us, that the larger employees, 500 and above, 89% of them already do provide paid sick leave. Also, looking at our own polling, it showed us that about 2/3 of our members reported that they already currently have paid sick leave. So yes, in many ways, we're small businesses unfairly targeted, no question. I think a lot of this was honestly targeted towards the retail and some of those in the bar restaurant business as well. So the new law, this is law, it's going to take effect here next week. And as of now, this is the writing and this is the way they ended up. Paid sick leave, you have to fully pay them 80 hours of sick leave. This is considered 2 weeks, 10 days, if they are full-time employees. If they are part-time, you pay based on the average number of hours they have worked in the previous 6 months. If they have not been there 6 months, I believe if they've been there 30 days or less, then you're allowed to calculate it based on the anticipated work that they would have otherwise done if you can't go back 6 months on their average part-time. The paid sick leave reasons, there's actually 6 reasons, we've condensed them, but effectively the way you look at this is for your leave for yourself is 100% pay. Leave for somebody else is a 2/3 pay. And they narrowed this significantly from where it was. Believe it or not, all of these here are temporary provisions that we've discussed, emergency provisions that are going to go here for a few months. However, it's a bill initially started with Democrats insisting that the 14 paid sick leaves, the 80 hours, be made permanent even after this. So we were able to knock it down from permanent to at least temporary. I know many people are still unhappy about it, but trust me, it's a whole lot better than where this was 2 Thursdays ago when we got started. So again, 100% pay for a full-time employee if they are told to quarantine themselves or go into isolation. This also applies to stay-at-home orders. So if you are under a stay-at-home order, they can take this enhanced paid sick leave under that because your state or your county instructed them to stay home. If you tell them to stay home, another government, or if you tell them to stay home because you believe they're showing symptoms or they've been exposed, that is also subject to the 100% pay. Now, when you get into the 2/3 pay, the employee's caring for an individual that's subject to quarantine or an illness, and this provision was also narrowed. This used to be just about caring for just about anybody. They narrowed it only to a minor, 17 or under. If your son or daughter cannot go to school or you cannot provide care for them, you are eligible now to do paid sick leave, but at 2/3 pay. And as you can see, they are capped over the 2-week period in the amount that the employer is responsible to cover. So this is on the paid sick leave under the new expansion of what's required. And I think you've heard the president and others say that they are reimbursing you and they are trying to make you whole. And we'll talk about that here in just one more slide. There's a couple other requirements here to keep in mind. They did provide a carve out for employers under 50 in order to seek a waiver from Department of Labor if it would jeopardize the viability of the business. We have not yet seen that process. Our understanding based on Wednesday conversations with the folks at Labor is hopefully we'll get something by April 1st, but it's not clear whether we will or will not. But those are to come. What their direction to us on Wednesday afternoon was if you are under 50 employees and you'd like to seek a waiver, start your documentation of any sick leave that's been taken, any other reasons of why this would jeopardize the viability of the business, and then you'll be able to use that when and if they do come up with this process. For the HR folks, it's important to understand that this expanded paid sick leave is in addition to your existing paid leave policy. You cannot tell them to use their already accrued sick leave prior to using this new full paid sick leave, whether at the 100% pay or at the 2/3. So they did specifically try to put in different priorities here. They did allow for individuals to make the decision to use different leave prior to this one. But again, they're going to use the more beneficial one that's out there. The law is going to take effect here next week and stay into effect through the remainder of the calendar year. Employees are not permitted to carry it over. The notice, the posters, and we'll show you where to get those posters here in a few slides. Those need to be posted. It's unclear whether or not they have to be up by April 1st or they just want them up now. Regardless, get the posters up. And in most likelihood, you're going to need to find some other communication for your employees not working remotely to receive those items as well. Now, looking at it from how you get reimbursed, they're doing it through a refundable tax credit, a payroll tax credit for the paid sick leave that's used. This will be similar process for the FMLA. Now, they are making you whole theoretically through the fully refundable as opposed to a non-refundable credit, and they're allowing the same caps that they were receiving to also apply for the employer. So your $5,110 over a 2-week period, that limitation is also what you can get. They've also set it up in a way that so they're applying it against the credit of the Social Security taxes that you're already paying into. And so what they'll do is they'll take it out and they'll do your credit against that. If you do not have enough Social Security taxes built up with the IRS, they will issue you that refund up to that $5,110 or to that $2,000 total to make that employer whole, so you could even feasibly get that money back if you haven't put it all in there. But John, what is one of the biggest concerns that we've heard from our members? It's on a quarterly basis.
Yes. So employers are paying the paid leave in current time, but they don't get reimbursed until they file their quarterly taxes. And so we recognize that is a challenge, but they are, I mean, as we talked about at the very beginning, the goal is to keep employees on payroll. And I suspect we're going to have some questions today as I'm thinking about, should I lay off my employees? Should I furlough my employees? Well, this is one reason in inducement that the federal government and the Congress is trying to do to encourage people to keep your workers during this economic downturn on payroll, give them this paid sick leave, and that they will reimburse you for those payments.
In our understanding, we received a question here whether they can use the 80 hours of sick time for non-COVID sick events. We're not lawyers. It's our understanding the language is limited to COVID related because it discusses COVID symptoms, exposure, or reasonable belief, this is my words, reasonable belief that they could have been exposed. And that's how they're looking at it. So if an employee and you're not in a shutdown state comes to you and you need to, and it's not clearly not COVID related, no, they need to use their regular paid sick leave that's been accrued. So we'll take a look at that on a case by case in some cases, but you'll have to figure that out with your employee. We also got into question about how this will work with a professional employer organization, a PEO. We do have a couple of our members that have been dealing with this issue because they are a PEO. It's our understanding, again, not from a legal standpoint, but the onus would fall onto the PEO for a lot of these issues when it comes to unemployment insurance and dealing with the accruement of hours. But we will get a little more clarification. We'll add that to our list of how we deal with that as well. Next, we'll take a look at the FMLA side. And as we're getting quite a bit of good questions, we'll be sure to take these back over to the different attorneys that are out there. So looking at the expansion of the FMLA, this falls similar along the lines there. They say it's a total of 12 weeks, which is correct. The first 2 weeks they say is not being paid, which is because they're using their paid sick leave first for those initial 2 weeks, and then they're adding on the 10 weeks on the back. So you do have a total between the paid sick time and the FMLA that are covered under this new expanded law. And you can see the definition here. This is something we want to point out too, the inability to telework that is actually in the language. So just because a person wants to take the leave, if you can put them to work at the shop, and so, or excuse me, from home, if they can have that ability to do remotely, and therefore theoretically they would not be subject to the FMLA if they did have the ability to do their job via telework. So we'd watch that one closely if you possibly could be able to do that and not have to deal with that issue. Again, the employees can use their.
The two key components of the family medical leave is it's for taking care of a child, a son or daughter who is home from school or is under some sort of quarantine. And then also another key component is while it's 10 weeks of paid leave of the 12-week program, you only have to pay two-thirds of the employee salary.
Yep. So again, you can see similar how you can tell them what to do and you cannot in those cases, and similar, the expanded FMLA though rate is going to be at a 2/3 of regular rate for full-time employees. Part-time employees are going to do the average pay that they received over 6 months. This is different. I believe in this case, the FMLA, you had to have been employed for at least 30 days prior, and so that's part of the issue. And I believe it does include. We'll get an answer on the temporary employees in terms of to what extent that they can benefit from some of these issues. Depends on their classification, also whether or not you are using them through a PEO, a temp agency, or on your own. Again, you can see a 50 or under viability. You can seek that. Again, there's no application at this time. You'd have to document it. And then similar to what we discussed over on the paid sick leave, there is also a 100% credit against the employer share on the payroll tax side per employee. Again, there is a limit on this one of $200 per day. And then looking at it, credits are refundable if it exceeds what you've been paying in your payroll tax. So again, you take a look at those areas. This is the new FMLA expansion along the lines of paid sick leave. This is law also in effect now through the end of the calendar year that we're there. If we take a look at, we encourage everybody to go to and download the posters. Both of them are down about 2/3 of the way down on the page. You'll see it says posters, and you'll have the two of them there, along with additional FAQs. That FAQ serves as the official position of the federal government when it comes to these issues. So regardless of attorneys interpreting one way or another, if it's in the FAQ, when it comes to the feds, in this case, it's typically going to be the law of the land. So we encourage all of you to read through those. They're not in legal jargon. They're actually pretty readable. But also please make sure you're in compliance by getting these posters up and running. And we know there's quite a few questions that are coming through. Again, we're not attorneys. This comes from one of the law firms with whom the associations work. We submitted a list of 14 questions to the lawyers based on feedback we received from a number of our members, and we're going to capture all the questions that are on here that we're unable to answer and be able to take those back to the attorneys and be able to get that back to our membership as well. But it's just some quick top of the line items because I think some of these questions in here might be addressed by this FAQ. I'm going to read through all of them, but give you a sense here. We've got the workers' comp question has been answered. Unless they actually contract COVID at the shop, it is not considered a workers' comp issue. If an employee is at a high risk, what you'd have to look at this point, they haven't been traveling anywhere. So you'd have to look at it from an exposure to somebody else that has confirmed case. Then you can look at it as that employee is high risk, and you might want to tell them to self-quarantine in that case. Again, prior to making some of these decisions are going to be very difficult for folks. We worked for you all during the 2008 and 2009 crisis and know how heart-wrenching that was for many people to deal with. Right now, you do have to take a look at how long do you think you might be shut down? How long can the company go without making payroll? Those are some of the things that each individual business is going to have to decide on their own. And then do they really believe once the ramp up happens, are they going to be able to rehire these folks and onboard them without any other restrictions and delays, because that's something we are all concerned about. Yes, we have to focus on today, but tomorrow we're going to be up again at some point. And you want to make sure you have the employee base, the resources, and the goodwill, frankly, with the employees during this difficult time where they are coming back and being productive in your workforce. So understanding the difference between the furlough and unemployed and termination. In both cases, the attorneys have told us that employees on furlough or laid off are eligible for unemployment. A reminder, unemployment is done at the state level. We'll talk in a few slides on what's in the new phase 3 economic stimulus bill as it relates to unemployment. So those issues are going to be done at the bottom. And so what we'd suggest here is kind of go through these. Any other questions that you've got, please get it to your NTMA and your PMA contact, and we'll try to get that out there as well. Again, just to clarify that if you are in a stay-at-home state and you are not deemed essential and your shop is closed for any reason due to COVID, then they are eligible to use that paid sick leave that's there. And this now comes down to how to talk to your employees, how to talk to them. There's a lot of people that are worried. I've got a friend of mine, she works at Columbia University Hospital right now, and I don't deem her position essential, but apparently she's in post-op trauma. She's still going to the hospital every day. So people are worried. You need to talk to your folks and tell them you are following CDC guidelines. If you are in a stay-at-home state, that you are deemed essential or you've deemed yourself essential, communicate to them that the state government has listed us as essential. We are staying open because the governments have told us to stay open. We are following whatever guidelines, public health, local, federal, state officials are telling us. Because you don't want it to have them say, you just don't want to lose a buck. That's why you're keeping us here and putting us all at risk. You again want to revert to, we're following CDC, OSHA guidelines. We're following what the folks at the local health and otherwise are telling us to do. And until that changes, we're going to keep doing what they've told us to do. So again, whenever possible, try to fall back on you are doing what the governments are telling you to do rather than we made the decision. Because once you start saying this isn't lobbying or legal advice, I think it's just common sense. I think you just have to be sensitive in how you're dealing with individual employees, that not just they themselves are frightened, but I guarantee you their spouses and their significant others when they come home at night are also worried about what's happening. So the fear of COVID, speaking of fear, catching it is not a valid reason for not going to work. So a person that is afraid to catch it without a reasonable belief that going to work is going to cause harm, and they don't have this in place for hospitals, but if you don't have a reasonable belief that you're going to get COVID by going to work, you need to go to work. So they cannot sit there and claim their paid sick leave or their FMLA that are there. You can, if you send an employee home because you're deem them as high risk, they do not need to be showing symptoms, is our understanding. The way the language is written, if you look at them, whether from high risk or you have reason to believe that there is a danger, but also be careful, because not a legal advice, because if you are telling them we want you to go home because we believe you're high risk, we want to be careful that you're not indirectly stating that there might actually be a risk here as part of your employment in the shop. So you want to be careful about that. And we got this question last night. If they're staying home, there's specific language in here. In this case, you should not be asking them whether or not, or for proof that they are sick. So you might have a number of folks that say they're not feeling well. This is not a doctor's note type of situation. Apparently, the interpretation that the lawyers have of this language is the government felt that the risk of people staying home and using as excuse wasn't anywhere near the risk of people actually getting sick. So they are looking at it from that standpoint as well. And then lastly, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has issued a definitive statement that employers, yes, you may take employee temperatures upon entry. For when it comes to those that are deemed high risk, we believe the CDC has put out a guidance. We've gotten a couple of questions just now with regards to employees over 60 or over 65. Again, none of you are physicians for the most part. When it comes to deeming those populations that are at high risk, we suggest you go to the CDC website, or even rather go to onevoiceinfo.org under the CDC guidance. My recollection is a couple of weeks ago, early in March, they did put out a guidance with regards to that. But jumping over, if we could, John, to phase 3, and then we'll continue to work on these FAQs. Sorry, one question that came in. Are the FAQs your questions or the federal government? These are 14. We developed 14 questions based on feedback from both PMA and NTMA members. So these were done by a private attorney that is on retainer by the NTMA. and also PMA has gotten some answers as well. So the FAQs, these ones that you see in front of you, these are not the binding ones from the federal government. Those will be on their website specific to the wage and hour division. These were just questions that we were getting repeatedly, and Caitlin's cell phone was getting, that we wanted to make sure that we push this out to other folks that are there. But moving forward, if we could, John, on phase 3 economic stimulus bill, we did submit 10 recommendations, and we actually got quite a few of them in so far.
Yeah, you know, how phase 3 was put together, it was the Congress recognized many of those questions that each of you have. With this economic downturn, how am I going to survive? Am I going to lay people off? Am I going to, am I going to furlough them? Or what am I going to do? The airline industry appealed to the administration saying, hey, our planes are empty. We're going to go under if we don't have help. Same with the hospitality industry. So that was the genesis of phase 3. When we first heard about phase 3, we immediately went into the field to NTMA and PMA members and asked them questions. We did a survey because we had already heard of the concerns about the economic downturn. And within like 48 hours, we received over 100 responses to one of our surveys. That is just unprecedented. That led us to narrow the recommendations from the survey to 10 recommendations. Essentially, the 10 recommendations are broken in a number of categories. 1, maintaining cash flow for small and medium-sized employees. 2, if you're going to be a beneficiary of federal loan, federal support, there needs to be some prompt payment provisions included in that. And we were successful in getting that done. We wanted to make sure that that you as manufacturers don't get your line of credit pulled from the bank just because we're in an economic downturn for no fault of your own. And then finally, to make sure you had the resources that when we come out of this economic downturn, that manufacturers have those resources to gear back up. So as we said earlier, it's a $2 trillion bill. There's $349 billion in small business loans. We've had many questions on that. How long is that going to take? Well, instead of creating a new loan program at the Small Business Administration, they're utilizing the existing Small Business 7A loan program. So it is their hope to be able to turn those loans around relatively quickly. They included $500 billion in support for those substantial industries across the country, airlines, hospitality, and stuff. And that's what that $500 billion goes for. There's additional money for state and local governments, $150 billion, and for hospitals, $130 billion. For example, I never thought about this, but I was talking to a hospital personnel person that, they stopped non-elective surgeries. Well, that is where hospitals make a lot of their money, is through non-elective surgeries. And so with the ban of non-elective surgeries, many hospitals are risking not being able to make payroll. So a different situation that many of you are in, but it's a similar situation of how this COVID virus is impacting everybody across the country. In addition, there's an expansion of unemployment insurance, and there's some certain tax provisions. That we pursued that through our survey, many of your members says, well, let's re-engage a 5-year look back on net operating loss. And so we were successful in getting that included in the phase 3 legislative package.
Yeah, there were quite a few out there. Thanks, John. And the way we developed these recommendations that you can find on the website, onevoiceinfo.org, on the left side of the screen, it'll say recommendations underneath the picture there. We developed those based on everybody on this webinar. We have received 103 responses from PMA and NTMA members to a survey we conducted last Tuesday. We initiated that survey immediately when we started getting the language with regard to the expansion of family medical leave and the paid sick leave, because we needed to see what our members thought, and we had to jump into action lobbying there, and then also knew moving forward. The way we structured those 10 recommendations was looking not just to include in this phase 3 stimulus bill, but also potentially in phase 4 and some other actions that could be done through regulations. We did also ask for prompt payment terms, which were included if the president invokes the Defense Production Act, which, while there is some confusion, sounds like FEMA has invoked it for some specific items. And when they have done so, and any of our members that are supplying on those contracts, prompt payment terms will be at 15 days. So we were able to get that included as well. With regards to the loan program, let's take a look at the small business lending program that they included here. This is separate from the small business disaster loan that was already up and running since February. I believe they put that one up, and that one has interest rates of 3.75%. You can't do both. You'd have to do one or the other. We'd suggest you look at this one. If you've started the other process, it's time to switch over. You're all wondering, give me a form, what do I fill out? The way the government does lending is you don't borrow directly from the federal government, you borrow through your traditional lender. It's our understanding, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida has indicated there are 800 banks throughout the United States that are currently already approved by the SBA, and the SBA is working through to expedite approval for a number of others to participate in this program. Again, companies up to 500 employees, 499 or less. The auto industry was able, auto suppliers rather, they weren't happy with the 500 number, so they went in, and we get the sense SBA is going to do NAICS codes for certain industries to allow possibly even up to 1,250 employees, 750, because there's some industries that SBA considers larger, or small businesses even under those higher employment definitions. The applications can be retroactive, so meaning it can cover any injury that you suffered going back to February 15th. And this first tranche will cover any applications. The application period would close here in a couple months on June 30th. This basically takes, so John mentioned this a bit ago, rather than starting a new program, which would take too long, the number one thing that we told the people at the White House and the Hill, cash flow is essential today, not 2.5 months from now, like SBA loans normally are. We need to make payroll next week. And so I think they heard us loud and clear, which is why they changed the existing 7A program and expanded it rather than create something brand new that would require a host of rules. This does not require them to issue new rules to implement the program because it's already there. We've just built it out. So what it does, up to $10 million, the formula will base on the total monthly payments of the previous 12 months. Basically, if you're in business post February 15th of 2020, and have under 500 employees, you are eligible. So you'll see how they'll calculate your input, your costs that are going out. In addition to deferral of payments, what they are allowing is that they will forgive the first 8 weeks of the loan for payroll, utilities, mortgage, and rent payments. So any of those items will be fully forgiven under those situations. And the document that we have done over the entire bill, the overview you can also find on the website, goes into more detail specifically on what items there are forgiven. Again, they say that these loans up to $10 million are capped at no higher than 4% rate, deferral of payment for 12 months, and you can see this is the language. So the question just came about, can you cover real estate taxes with this loan? The language that you see here literally was copied and pasted from the bill. So we would argue unlikely because, for example, on some of the other areas where they'll cover mortgage interest, but they won't cover some other areas. So we'll have to double check when it comes down to some of those other areas. But yes, it does cover, our understanding, it covers pensions, I believe, and because it does cover retirements at least. So we would argue that would likely include pensions, but we can see confirmation there. For you smaller businesses, this is what we take a look at is really important. Personal guarantee and the collateral requirements have been eliminated for purposes of this loan. So we think that right there is one of the most significant things they could have done for small businesses. We remember during the Great Recession, that was one of the biggest challenges for pass-through businesses in particular with regards to the personal guarantee and putting up the home and all that kind of situation. So we were able to get that knocked out, which we think is very significant with regards to our manufacturers that are out there. Again, you can see what they're trying to do here. Your payroll costs forgiven for the first 8 weeks of the loan's terms. They're trying to keep employees on payroll for as much as possible. So our sense is here, that's why they're giving you this injection of cash so quickly. That's why they're specifically saying, we're going to cover you for about 2 months worth. You can literally, they're just going to give you free money, and that's how it's going to work. The banks are going to have themselves will get reimbursed. So any loan that is forgiven within 90 days, the federal government will reimburse that bank. Because many of you are going to go and say, well, what banker is going to lend to me based on my risk factor and based on them potentially having to give up the cash? No, the government's going to cover all fees on both the borrower and the lender side, and the feds will also take care of the reimbursement, and it's a 100% guarantee of that loan don't recall the date, but in about 3 months, it drops down to an 85% guarantee and then to a 75% guarantee. And then it sits at there through the remainder of this calendar year of December 31st, 2020. So you do not have to repay this loan back by June 30th. Again, your payments are deferred. At the end of the term will generally go up until the end of the calendar year is where they're going with this. So this is the main small business component that they created. It mimics a lot of the things that we worked on during the Great Recession and incorporated a couple of our, for example, we asked them to get rid of personal guarantee. We got that taken care of, and it's a lot broader than your traditional loan use. Again, you can make your payroll, keep the lights on, pay your utilities. Those are the kinds of things that we wanted this cash for, and so far we'll find out in a week how it's working, but we were able to get almost everything we wanted on that provision.
So let's talk about the program for those who have over 500 employees. And this is the $500 billion program that we talked about earlier. It was largely set up to help significant industries around the country that have been negatively impacted by the COVID virus. But NCMA and PMA employers who are over 500 may seek eligibility for such a program. This is very similar to the TARP program. If you remember, TARP, the asset relief program that was put forth during the 2008 fiscal crisis. But they put a little bells and whistles in. When this was originally put forth, the administration was determining who would be getting those loans. And Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi wanted additional guardrails put on. And so now how these loans when these loans get dispersed, they need to be vetted through Congress. Congress needs to know about it. And in addition, they've added a few bells and whistles. For example, if you are going to be eligible, if you're going to receive this part of this $500 million, you will need to permanently provide your employees 2 weeks paid leave. Now, for 89% of people across the country who employ over 500 people, that's not a big thing. But for those other 11% that may have an impact, you also must, if you accept this money, you also must permanently pay the minimum you could pay is a $15 minimum wage per hour. And so what impact that has on those employers at 500 or more, yet to be seen. But no, if you're interested in a program like that, those are some of the bells and whistles that they added on to put some additional guardrails on the industry. There are other things that were included in the bill. For example, payroll taxes will be delayed 2 years. Well, technically, it's a 2-year delay, but you'll pay 1 year you'll pay half of that at the end of this year, and then the other half of your payroll taxes at the end of 2021. And so we had mentioned we were successful in getting net operating loss. A look back of 5 years for losses that may have taken place in 2018, 2019, 2020. Increase in interest deductibility was also included in the package. So that is what we're looking at. So again, it's about trying to keep incentivize employers to keep their employees hired.
Right, and John's exactly right. Look at that final point down there, employee retention credit of up to $10,000 per employee for wages paid. They're trying to do everything they can. I talked to my father about his small business and what to do, and I gave him the same advice. Right now, go reach out to your lender. That is the very first thing you need to do. All of you that are looking at cash shortage or want to explore the small business loan on that previous slide, talk to your lender, whether it's your bank, community bank, credit union, whatever it is. Ask them, are they SBA approved? And then start that conversation. If they tell you no, ask them why not. But that's where this is all going to be done. I know you're all manufacturers and you're ready to go. Where do I go? What do I do? What form do I fill out? Again, for the lending, it's going to have to come from going to your lender rather, use the borrower. And for the tax provisions that John just mentioned, some of these, yes, net operating loss, we love it, but you're not going to realize that till the end of the year. When it comes to your refundable tax credits for the expansion of sick leave, FMLA, you're going to have to wait till the quarterly on that one. So we're going to see the IRS increasingly rapidly, Treasury Department is going to start issuing more forms to fill out. On the One Voice Info website, we do also have a link to all the different state agencies that are out there for their tax divisions, tax departments rather. They also are providing some, not just delays, but also different forms we've already seen if you go to the AICPA, that's the Association of International CPAs, they've got a chart that with links to all the different forms that may have been made available at the state level for real tax relief there and tax extensions that have been automatically issued. But again, the Treasury, we're hoping here in the next few weeks, and once we get all those forms, we'll communicate that to everybody. Any other guidance that we get with regards to the loan or the other tax credits that are out there, that will certainly go not just to everyone on the webinar, we'll make sure we get that posted online for all of our other members to see as well. And that just brings us to the next steps, as where we are and where are we going from here. More governments, we believe, are going to close, folks. This thing is not going to be over anytime soon. John mentioned Easter. That's been our sense as well, that we are going to be able to go out there and get everything back open after Easter. Unlikely. We believe that they started to shut the bars down. Chicago did, Illinois did what they did on March 17th because of mass gatherings for St. Patrick's Day. Now, after what happened in Mardi Gras in New Orleans, and that's the reason they're growing exponentially down there, we believe that they are going to increasingly do more stay-at-home orders, despite the reluctance of to direct them to do that. So what we are hoping for is that we continue to get more support from FEMA. There are ways we are trying to reach out. How can we help? How can we help manufacture for the relief efforts? And we are looking in contact with the White House and those folks. But John, I think next they're moving forward to a phase 4 sometime in mid-April would be my sense. That's what Hoyer is talking about.
Yeah, so we already know the Senate is in recess until mid-April. And when they come back, I think they're going to assess how successful they have been in implementing phase 1, 2, and 3, and let's fill in the gaps. Well, we already know that FEMA, who's now taking the lead on the COVID virus, is going to need more funding. Is the $130 billion that was provided to hospitals, or the $150 billion to state and local governments, is that enough? Obviously, Governor Cuomo in New York says it's just a drop in the bucket. And so I think the Congress is going to look at what areas they may have had a shortfall and try to supplement that with phase 4. In addition, are there other tax provisions that might ignite economic growth in this country? And so I think there will be a serious study of tax provisions. Ironically, not necessarily part of phase 4, but there has been an effort and a push to have the administration stop the tariffs that they have imposed on China, have a 90-day delay, suspend the tariffs on China for 90 days. Trump initially brought that up based on conversations that he had with many business folks, and we've been playing that drum as well. But the administration seems to be backing off on that. But again, I think things will change definitely after April 12th when it's Easter, to see where the economy is going, how many more states, how the curve is a curve expanding, or is the curve of the people getting the virus going down? And so I think after April 12th is when we're gonna know for sure, and that's about when the Congress comes back into session. So.
Yeah, and it's important to understand too that these still go back to being state level decisions. For example, the state of Wisconsin currently has their shutdown order in effect until April 24th, and we know a number of other states increasingly do as well. So we also caution, we're not infectious disease experts by any means, but the people here in Washington that are, and the people we are speaking with, indicate we might have 2 rounds of this. So anything you're preparing to do today, possibly be prepared to do again in 6 months. And we understand we're all just trying to get through the now, but there is a real concern that this could just continue on for several months, particularly as you can see, we haven't even hit a lot of the upper South and some of those areas quite yet. And even New York State hasn't hit its peak yet. Some are thinking they might hit their peak in the next 7 to 10 days. And then I would watch California and New York. Once they peak, that'll give us an idea of the arc of this thing. But folks, it's not going away anytime soon. You need to be having these conversations with your employees, your vendors, your customers, because everyone's in it together. And again, it's a state by state. What do you tell your employees? How do you do that? And we've got additional resources we can keep providing to you.
Yeah,
Omar, what's your take?
How
is this gonna impact the presidential race, Omar?
Yeah, that's a good point, John. Obviously, no one wants to talk about politics at a time like this, but it's inescapable. Right now, it's almost certain that we would expect that the Democratic convention in Milwaukee likely gets canceled. in July or turned into something else. The Republicans aren't for a little bit later when they go in North Carolina. But again, no one can move the election date itself without an act of Congress, and Nancy Pelosi is not going to give Donald Trump more time in office. So they're going to probably figure something out. There's going to be more funding in the phase 4, certainly for election security, and a push to do vote by mail. But this is impacting basically everybody. Everything you just saw that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, now has been confirmed having coronavirus. So this is affecting and impacting everybody. Caitlin?
Yeah, and where you can get more information, certainly about the tools and resources that we have, the latest from Washington, and then we will still be talking politics. You can listen to our podcast, Talking with One Voice. You can find it wherever you get podcasts. We have a recent episode up and surely more episodes to come. Also, a couple of people were asking where they can find the talking points. Messaging materials are on the onevoiceinfo.org website. The website, as Omar said a couple of times, is being updated multiple times a day. So you can find that on the homepage of that website. Look for One Voice COVID-19 Communications Tools. It is right underneath the federal, state, and local government information. Every time you come to the page, it probably looks a little different. Hopefully that's not too confusing for folks, but as we're getting new information, we're trying to make it as clear as possible where that information can be found. So, that's why it is that way. You can find it there. And of course, if you have any questions about where you can find information, you can always email one of us or give us a call and we can point you to a direct link.
And I want to stress from Caitlin's standpoint, where you're looking at right now, the reason there's a bunch of links on that website is because things are so fluid. The government documents themselves are literally changing. Pennsylvania changed their definition 4 times, and the most recently being on Wednesday evening at 9 p.m. So I know many of you would just rather us just give you the forms. You tell me what to fill out. Unfortunately, in this situation, due to the fast evolving nature of the problem, we just have to give you the links that the government's doing because they literally are changing. We had Colorado was only allowing 50% of workers going into their facilities. Well, 48 hours after they issued that guidance later this week on the 24th of March, they made it a 100% stay at home, similar with others. So again, please look at the resources, find your state through our website or others, and then you can look at the exact definition. As of right now, the NTMA and the PMA have sent to all districts and all chapters at this point that have a stay at home order in place, at least at the state level. We have already sent you the language as it came out. Keep in mind, it could evolve. And so we would want you to take a look at there. We did have a question that came in that we'll definitely take to the lawyers, but I'll give you off the top of our head. Do you take a look at the New York State paid sick leave or the federal? If it is COVID related, our belief is you should be following the new paid sick leave policy from the federal government. It's because, again, it's specific to COVID and it's going to be more enhanced than anything that the states have. So again, we'll take that to the lawyers, but I'm almost positive they'll confirm that you are going to want to use the federal paid COVID sick leave guidance. Again, it is related to COVID. They put in the language that it's got to be related to that. Another question we received, speaking of stay-at-home orders, again, for the free movement of your employees that are deemed essential workers, critical employees, there hasn't been a definitive answer on what you give them as a hall pass, so to speak. There was a police officer in Dallas earlier this week that apparently pulled an employee over that had a letter on company letterhead stating that they were deemed essential critical, and the police gave them a hard time anyway. Again, that's Texas, but you might want to take a look at putting something on letterhead to the effect, and again, not legal advice, but don't state it is our opinion that we are deemed essential. No, based on the guidelines presented under the state of Michigan, we are, or under what, Michigan's a bad example if you're auto supplier because of the uncertainty, but take a look at what you can put on paper. Again, cite the government in accordance with the CDC and with the state of New York and the federal rules listed as of this date. You have been deemed, we have all been deemed, kind of thing. Those are there isn't a set formula or set template. We've helped some companies out, but again, for the most part, it is exactly that. Reference something back to a state or federal or county government action, state that the definition, you can even copy and paste the definition if you want, and then give it to them. I don't think you have to individualize it to the employee's name, so long as they've got a way to prove that they work for that employer if they are in fact pulled over. That again is something that you're going to definitely want to do with visitors, We know some members that are not allowing their customers to pick up. They have to go to a nearby warehouse. Anything that you have, you should post it. You need to have a uniform policy, whether it's for testing for fever or allowing people to go home. Communications right now is essential with your employees so they know what's going on. Don't forget to put those posters up there as well. Also, again, thanks Hale, since California's been ahead of the curve. He's one of the counties that had to deal with this starting last Tuesday. Some of you think you've got it bad. California's been shut down for 12 days so far now. And so thanks Hale on a lot of the tips there. Yes, put in your customers' names if you can in these letters, along with the critical parts that help you meet that essential definition. In those cases, again, the information you provide is just something to give that level of comfort to the employees, and also in case they are stopped on their way to their place of employment. So with that, we'll stick on the line for another few minutes if there's any other questions. I know there's a few in here that we did not fully answer, and we will go back and taking a look at where they are and some of the other priorities that are there. And if enough people would like one, we could possibly talk to the attorneys about a sample letter of what you can give to your employees. Again, know that once a Missouri attorney might have a different interpretation than the Michigan one based on what's needed and what happens in their states. So if someone says a sample letter would be great. Okay, we have our assignment. We will add that to the list and we will work on that as well. We'll give folks another minute if there's any other questions. Again, as always, a copy of this is going to be emailed, sent out to all registrants this afternoon. A copy of the slide deck will accompany it, along with obviously the recording. And then the folks at Bracewell will also get it uploaded onto the website where you can have everything in a one-stop shop that's out there. When we talk about one question we've just got in, when you say another phase of this is possible in late 2020, do you mean shutdowns again? We hope not. From what we understand, at least from the experts in the medical field, is that this very likely will have 2 cycles to it in terms of it hitting the population again. We're starting to see that in China when they got close to eliminating new cases. The new ones started to come in from foreigners traveling. So now they've locked down the country entirely and not letting people come in because they're trying to prevent the second one to come around again. Now, this is from the situation of pure speculation, but it hasn't really hit Latin America or Africa yet. And so even if we start to clear up, the experts are telling us in the next couple of months, at any time it could whip back and basically have everyone be vulnerable until the vaccine comes up, hopefully sometime sooner than next year. So that's what the are. Now, sorry, we're looking at the Chiron here. Cuomo is now saying, the governor of New York, they're not going to hit their apex for another 21 days. So folks, this tells us that we're going to be in this for quite some time. That's coming up there. Payroll tax holiday. So do you have any information on when we can defer payroll tax payments? I will double check, but I believe the retro date is, it's either the 15th of either 15th of March or the 15th of February. We will double check and we'll get an answer on that. You do it in 2 stages, as John mentioned. You're allowed to pay half at a later date, and then half, I think it's at the end of 2022, where you do the second portion of that payroll of it. And no, Josh, it's not like the chicken pox. Once you have it once, you can get it again. We've heard at least of 1 case of somebody contracting it twice. We have not heard of more than 1 case of that yet globally, but we're not quite sure of that yet. And the One Voice site, thank you. The question with regards to how often are we updating the website? Caitlin's our expert. I think she's been updating it quite frequently whenever we've got some new information.
Multiple times a day. Multiple times a day. So the things that are updated most frequently are the list of state-by-state actions. You know, we try to keep that as current as possible by uploading new charts so you can see that. And then every time we have a new resource, so like the communications page was just updated. You can find also under the labor issues, like the FAQs are new to the site. So I would say it's updated at least once a day, probably more than that. Separately though, just so that people don't feel like totally overwhelmed by that reality, we also, both associations are sending out emails to all members. So when there is a major update to the site, it is also usually reflected in that member communication. So you're probably not missing content, even if you're not checking the site that frequently.
We had a couple of questions on the loan program and how would that work. You are still eligible for the loan if you do not maintain full payroll. The loan forgiveness is about maintaining payroll. So those first 8 weeks that would be forgiven, that would cover the payroll and some of the other issues that we had mentioned. So that is where it's relative. The standard at the larger companies, and we don't recall seeing language specific on the smaller, but we would accept this for both, is maintaining payroll at the same levels is typically regarded at 90%. That's the exact language they put in for the larger corporations, 500 or more. We'll double check, but believe that it was probably written the same way for the small business loan as well. So effectively, the way that they look at it, March 24th is the date from which they'll count back your payroll numbers for the purposes of the loan. So on March 24th, if you had 100 employees and when they look at the end of the term, you have to maintain them till I believe September 24th or maybe September 20th of this year. If you maintain it till then at 90%, so you still have 90 employees when you hit September mark, then that 8 weeks will continue to be forgiven. And that's, I believe, that's certainly how they are applying it at the larger ones, and believe that's also how they're doing it at the local ones. There are a couple of areas where FEMA particularly has a portal for those companies that want to retool and change their operations to help out. If you go to FEMA.gov, there is a portal there. Their website's actually pretty decent, so you'll be able to find more information there. We have not seen actual funding from the government to come out and saying, if you make this project, we'll give you a grant to be able to purchase that equipment. We've not seen that one as yet, and there's still some uncertainty because we did not see equipment being included in terms of the small business loans. There are some questions about, should I stick with my equipment? We'll get a more definitive answer. Our understanding, though, is they're intending more for these loans to be O&M and not as much on the CapEx side, especially if they end up giving you close enough terms to, because if they're going to cap these at just under at 4% or less, and you might be already hovering at 4 on the loan you're getting, it might make sense to stick with what you've got. But we'll clarify, but almost positive that it does not include equipment, but we will double check on that again. Any other questions that are coming through? There was one other question that came through. If we are open, but employees decide to stay at home due to California shelter order, are they entitled to the paid sick leave? If you are deemed essential, they are deemed essential. So the way it works is they don't really deem the company essential, they deem the workers essential is how the system has been structured. So if your company has been deemed essential or you interpret it as such under the definition of that county, for example, you in California or throughout that state there and otherwise, then they need to come to work. There is, even Illinois is pretty clear about it in their guidance as well. So again, you can't just stay home and claim the paid sick leave because you want to. Now, if they are shut down and you're not deemed essential, then yes, they are subject to that expanded paid sick leave that comes out there.
But Omar, I believe if an employee is deemed essential because he's doing a project for, let's say, Ford, it's just those employees who are doing that project are essential. If you have employees in your shop who are not doing a project that is deemed essential, they could take advantage of the paid sick leave.
So that's right. So that's where it comes down to the state by state. So that's not universal since they're all doing that. Michigan requires that. New York also, I believe, is requiring that those employees that are working on an essential function, they are the only ones. So let's say you've got medical device and sporting equipment. The employees working on sporting equipment cannot be at work in those particular states. There's other ways they've done it. So Jersey, for example, what they did is they said, if you're a brick and mortar and lack the ability to do remote working, then you may remain open under certain circumstance, but with minimal employees essential for operations. So again, how do you determine that flexibility? What's the real guidance that's out there? So those are some of the other issues. That's why it's so important. Again, we are federal lobbyists. We're jumping in here just because we know everyone needs some help and some support. That's why we're not trying to punt. We have put together the resources for you, but you have to look on a state by state basis, which is why we can't give you the definitive answer until and unless they fully adopt the federal guidelines on which we're working. Give it another minute. Any other questions? Again, this will be recorded, sent out. You've got our contact information. You have the resources at NTMA and PMA working nonstop, literally around the clock on this through the weekends as well. We are here to support you, happy to help in any way that we can. We know there's a lot of confusion and worry and concern out there. and please reach out to us. The way we look at this, your team needs to be your CFO, your HR manager, and your legal counsel. Those three groups need to be talking right now as you start to formulate your options. Once you have your options based on your legal, your workplace, and your finances, then your next thing is you need to go to your lender right away and say what's going on out there right now. One question that just came in quickly as we wrap: we have a customer that is deemed a critical supplier, but they do not directly supply the efforts for COVID-19. Should I remain open? The answer is yes, but you have to look at your state. Virtually every state that we recall, we've done about 20 write-ups. I believe we believe almost every state that at least I've read includes supply chain. Even Michigan, some of the other states, they have a separate provision just for covering suppliers, packagers, and others to those as well. So yes, if you have a customer that is deemed critical, then you as a supplier are also deemed critical. There's language both in the federal non-binding guidance on suppliers, and then also some suppliers rather, and then at the state level, virtually all of them that we've seen include suppliers there. So in those cases, to Hill's sage input advice, we do suggest go to that customer, say, okay, you're deemed essential, just give me a letter so we're all on the same page, identifying the product, identifying the reason, quoting the categories that are there and where you are. On the counting of the 50 employees question, we will get you a confirmed response on that, and whether or not it includes temp workers. I've got to believe that they address that in there. We will get you an answer on it. We do know that it's calculated, at least for the purposes FMLA, they had to be employed for at least 30 days prior to February 15th was the date, and then or both, which is the same thing. And then the other one is the paid sick leave. They did not have to be there for 30 days. So we will take a look at that. We'll defer to those of you that are on this webinar, and please respond back either somehow. If you'd like this to happen every week, possibly every Friday for the foreseeable future at noon, that is something internally that PMA and NTMA have discussed. So we may go ahead and do that in addition to the other regular communications. All of you, at least 7,000 of you, received an email from One Voice yesterday, and that included the more detailed summary of what's in the phase 3 stimulus. So if you want the more details on that, we wrote that one up and got that out yesterday late afternoon. It should also be on both websites that One Voice is running right now. Again, Caitlin, want to wrap us up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everybody for a great discussion. We know that there is a lot of information coming at you and you all have a lot of questions. It looks like, Omar, there's a lot of enthusiasm around the idea of having regular updates. So we'll definitely work with both associations about how to make that happen. In the interim, please do check our onevoiceinfo.org website, where you can find what you need and all of the tools and resources that have been described on this call. And of course, you can reach us by phone or by email anytime. Thank you all very much for joining, and we will look forward to remaining in touch with you as this situation develops. Thanks very much.
Everybody stay safe.
Stay safe,
Yeah.
everybody.